Blasphemy is more spiritual than orthodoxy and religious dogmatism. Welcome, Vanakkam, Swagatham. In this video, I want to propose to you a line of thought that could shock the viewers initially, but if you would go on and listen to what I have to share in the course of this video, I'm sure you will be persuaded. The prevailing impression or opinion or assumption seems to be that blasphemy is the ultimate sin against God. In olden days, say among the Jews, a blasphemer was stoned to death. It was considered a religious obligation to be highly intolerant of blasphemers. And putting blasphemers to death or eliminating them from the midst of believers was considered a sacred duty towards God. But if you examine the history of humankind, you will find an entirely different order of reality. Let's examine just two instances to be clear about what I mean. I'll take them up in order of chronology. Socrates lived a few centuries before Jesus Christ. He was judicially murdered in Athens by the representatives of the law of the land as well as under the compulsion of public opinion. The charges leveled against him were two. First, that he was a blasphemer. Secondly, that he was immoral. He was labeled a blasphemer because he was alleged to not believe in any God, and he was labeled and stigmatized as immoral because he was thought to corrupt the youth of Athens. The ground for the first allegation, namely that he did not believe in God, was merely that he believed that God could not be limited, or the concerns of God could not be limited to a particular segment of humanity. And it's astonishing to me even today that Socrates deemed himself as belonging to the whole world. In our words, we would call him a citizen of the world, a global citizen. And that idea, that self-perception, that one is a global citizen, originated in his idea that God is universal, God is omnipresent, and therefore God cannot be claimed as the private or exclusive property of a particular group of people, a particular race, or particular nationality, or a city-state, which today we would recognize as a highly enlightened standpoint. But under the assumptions that prevailed there, namely that every city-state, every city indeed, had its patron deities, patron gods, and incurring the wrath of these protective or patron deities would endanger the very viability and survival of the state or the city-state. So, looked at from the perspective of this entrenched belief, which we today recognize to be absolutely fallacious, which was considered absolutely dogmatic by the people of Athens, it was only natural then when Socrates taught something which was far ahead of his times, he seemed a blasphemer and an enemy of the religion that prevailed then, and therefore he had to be exterminated. As regards the challenge that he was immoral, based on the fact that he engaged the youth of Athens in conversation, encouraging them to question, re examine, rethink the assumptions that they held. We know now in retrospect that this is a necessary exercise for people to attain clarity of opinion and understanding. So, the point to be registered here is from religious point of view, Socrates was deemed the enemy number one of the religion that prevailed then because he seemed a blasphemer in the eyes of the custodians of the religion of the times in Athens. Now think of another person, Jesus of Nazareth. And again, two allegations were brought against him. The first was that he was a blasphemer. He claimed to be the Son of God. And to the Jews, it was unthinkable that God could have a son. The second allegation was that he was someone who advocated rebellion against the Roman authority. So he was accused of seditious advocacies. And on both counts, he deserved death. On the count of religious blasphemy, he deserved death from the Jewish point of view. And on account of his advocacy, which seemed political, namely the reluctance to accept the absolute authority of Caesar in Rome, he seemed a political subversive element. So on both counts, he deserved death as per the opinion of the times. Now, Christians today do not realize that their very existence goes back to someone who was a blasphemer. And Jesus seemed a blasphemer in the eyes of the Jews because his spiritual vision, his spiritual understanding was way ahead of what prevailed at the given point in time. Now, I'll come back to this presently. Let's consider another example, an example different to this. By the common consent of all historians, the historians I have read, the wisest of all rulers or kings or emperors history has ever seen was Marcus Aurelius of Rome. Now, he was a pious man, he was a righteous man, he was totally committed to justice, and he was reputed as a man of compassion and kindness. And yet, he became a zealous persecutor of Christianity. Why? Because Marcus Aurelius, as emperor, believed that he had a duty to protect the cohesion and stability of the society over which he presided. And that even though the society was not in a perfect condition, and the moral fiber of the society of his times was very weak, he feared that destabilizing the settled religious beliefs and practices of times would further weaken the society. And he certainly could not imagine or envision an alternative to the religious order which seemed to undergird the society. Even today, the relevance of a religion is justified in terms of how and to what extent it is necessary to undergird the ethical, moral, humane substance of a society. In the Hindu context, the word used for religion is dharma, though dharma cannot be translated as religion. Dharma means a set of principles that are necessary to support, sustain, undergird the ethical, moral structure of a society, without which the society will disintegrate. So that was more or less the idea that Marcus Aurelius also had. And therefore, when he was faced with the reality of a completely different understanding of God, understanding of what it means to be human, understanding of how people should relate to God and to each other, etc., he felt that it was his bounden duty, if you like, his imperative duty to root out the spread of this new religion. So what has happened? A man who is otherwise considered the best and the wisest of rulers in human history also has this black spot on his forehead that he became a persecutor of Christianity. The greatest irony in the life and rule of Marcus Aurelius is that he was a Christian without knowing it. As a king, he actually practiced or caused to be practiced the very same values and ideals that Jesus stood for. But when it came to the religious perception of it, insofar as Christianity was considered a new religion, a counter religion, a religion opposed to the religiosity that he practiced and he thought his people should practice, as constituting the foundation for the viability of the society and the country, he became a persecutor of Christianity. A practitioner of the essence of Christianity becoming a persecutor of Christianity, to me, is the ultimate paradox in the history of our species. And it's that paradox that we find in the person and reign of Marcus Aurelius. And I strongly recommend to my viewers Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, that book is available on the net. Please download and read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So, from what I've shared so far, it should be fairly clear that blasphemy is something that we need to take with a pinch of salt, in the sense, not blasphemy as such, our allergy to blasphemy or our sense of indignation about what seems blasphemous to us must be taken with a pinch of salt. Now, what actually is the operating principle, or what is the essential element in blasphemy? Blasphemy, for all practical purposes, is religious dissent. Religious dissent. Now, religious dissent, particularly in relation to the doctrines that a religious community or a people happen to hold about God, the nature of God, the dispositions of God, the priorities of God, the outlook of God, so on and so forth. So therefore, an examination, a historical examination of what blasphemy has been, how it has been practiced, and the many atrocities that were inspired by religious zeal against those who were labeled blasphemers at the given time, should sit up and make us sit up and wonder about the place and importance of dissent in religion. Now, whether it is in religion or in science or in any other field of human activity, humankind has progressed only through dissent. If we are to stay stuck in the status quo, obviously there will be no progress. If Jesus had remained as a pious and faithful Jew, there would have been no Christianity. If Prophet Muhammad had remained a pious and abiding member of the Quraysh tribe, the main tribe at his time, there would have been no Islam. If Lord Buddha had remained an ardent practitioner of Brahminical religious rites, there would have been no Buddhism. If Guru Nanak had not thought differently from the ideas that prevailed about God and about human realities under Islam and Hinduism, there would have been no Sikhism, and so on and so forth. So, humankind has progressed only through blasphemy. This is something that we must realize. The world has not gained anything from the so called pious and dogmatic people. If at all the world has seen anything on account of them, it is the perpetration of unthinkable atrocities and shocking injustices in the name of God. So, what this very, very important historical reality challenges us to do is to be alert against our assumptions about God. Now, on the one hand, we say that there is only one God. At the same time, there is absolutely no consensus about God. And therefore, people through the centuries have quarreled about God. And all the religious wars, religious conflicts, communal tensions, even today, are all about God and gods and goddesses. But whose idea of God is absolute and final? If the witness of history is any indication, we must realize that the ideas and assumptions about God and gods that human beings entertain from time to time are all relative. Whereas each religious sect, each religious community deems its idea of God as final and absolute. And not only final and absolute, but also, for that very reason, infallible. Now, infallibility means that I am totally right and there's not even the slightest margin possibility of error in my understanding of God. I understand God completely, truthfully, absolutely, and finally. And therefore, nothing that I say or I have come to believe about God is open to debate, question, or argument. Infallibility. Religious infallibility, as John Stuart Mill has argued very, very convincingly, involves not only strong convictions about one's own belief about God. Even more importantly, religious infallibility is the pretension to the power to decide what others should or should not believe. It is arrogating to oneself the right to decide for others. So when I say that I am infallible in my understanding of God, in that claim is also contained the seed of my absolute intolerance, as well as the duty to be intolerant towards anyone who holds an opinion about God different to the opinion that I hold. That's a problem with infallibility. And it is this infallibility which operates at the heart of religious orthodoxy. That is why in Kerala, for example, the Orthodox Church is the most intolerant of all churches, because it is duty bound to believe that what it says it maintains for itself is the only truth, and therefore everyone else is in the wrong. And therefore a true Orthodox Christian has to cut himself off from other forms of other sects of Christianity, and is in fact obliged to look down upon others. Now, it is this presumption of infallibility which keeps the Orthodox Church anchored far back in history. And therefore, the extent to which the Orthodox Christian tradition can connect to the human condition at the present time is highly questionable. Though there have been thinkers within the Orthodox tradition who tried to make amends for it, but in my opinion, they have not succeeded. And in the context of the Orthodox Church in Kerala, the only name I can think of is the name of Metropolitan Paulus Mar Gregorios, who, without proclaiming it to be so, made a valiant attempt to rescue orthodoxy from its fixation to the past. And The inheritor of that tradition today is Father K.M. George. He tries to do his level best, but the extent to which he succeeds in influencing the outlook of mainstream Orthodox Church is highly debatable. He exists as in my opinion, as a very sound but marginalized presence in the Orthodox tradition. He's barely Orthodox, and the Orthodox Church looks at him with a certain degree of suspicion and anxiety. So, now coming to the Indian politics at the present time, without any doubt, not only the authenticity, even the future of Indian democracy is seriously threatened by the dogmatic self-assertion of Hinduism, which is the majority religion, brutal majority. And when Hinduism becomes orthodox, dogmatic, and is colored with the presumptions of infallibility, it becomes intolerant, which is uncharacteristic of Hinduism. Hinduism is easily the most tolerant of all religions. I'm not saying that Hinduism is 100% tolerant. Um, if Hinduism were all that tolerant, Buddhism would not have been persecuted and virtually driven out of India. There's a limited tolerance when it comes to religion, and there is a limited tolerance when it comes to any body of organized thought. For example, the Congress people cannot be very tolerant of the BJP or Sangh Parivar. The Trinamool Congress cannot be very tolerant of, say, the communists, and so on and so forth. Any body of thought which is organized as an active element in society will carry within itself a seed of intolerance. But that intolerance ensures that this particular movement or this particular entity degenerates over time. It is very essential for a religious tradition or a political tradition or a philosophical tradition to remain open and tolerant of dissent for the sake of its own vitality. The moment any body of thought, any religious tradition becomes self-enclosed and presumptuous, intolerant of dissent, it condemns itself to getting rigor mortized, becoming like a dead body, petrified, and also getting progressively alienated from the lived realities of the world. So let me come to the original proposition I made. I said that blasphemy is more spiritual than abject blind faith, because blind faith imprisons us in the past. If you look at faith as it is understood at the popular level, which is a serious misunderstanding, the substance of that faith pertains to what happened a long time ago. Therefore, the more ardent you are in terms of your beliefs or your faith life, or the more ardent you are as a believer, the more out of touch with the present day realities you become. You become backward looking, and you live as though nothing of value has happened. In the case of Christians, for example, in the last 2,000 years, or in the case of Hindus, the last 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years. Now, which is most manifestly irrational, untenable, and also untrue, highly untrue. After all, life is lived not on the basis of religion but of culture, and culture is a domain of incessant change where everything moves forward. It's like a river that flows forwards, where religion seems to be like a river that flows backwards. This reality we need to encounter, become aware of, because it's highly injurious to our own welfare to remain fixated in the past. And dissent must be recognized as an inalienable part of the fundamental human duties as well as freedoms. the freedom to disagree is the most authentic aspect of personal freedom, because if I think for myself, there's a good chance that I differ from what you think. So if you set up yourself as the norm and you think that everyone else has the duty to conform to what you say, then where is the space left for my freedom of thought? Jesus claimed for himself the freedom to think even within the framework of the established religion of the times, which is Judaism. Aristotle claimed for himself the freedom to think within the established framework of the Athenian society, its beliefs, its assumptions. And both did so in order to promote the ultimate interests of humanity. And both were perceived as blasphemers and enemies by their respective societies and religious traditions. Therefore, I see these are two foremost unforgettable warnings against the unjustifiability, against the serious dangers immanent in religious intolerance, immanent in any pretension to religious infallibility, immanent in the presumption that one understands God and God is nothing more than what a particular tradition understands God to be. Equating God with a particular tradition of religion is, to me, an insult to the greatness of God, to the cosmic nature of God, and the absolute sovereignty of God. A God whom I can understand completely has to be inferior to myself. There's no question about it. And therefore, any religious tradition which claims that its idea of God is absolute and final, because that's the idea of God that the people within the tradition can understand and practice, becomes an insult to the nature of God, to the person of God, simply because that tradition reduces God to the level of being an instrument, a tool in their hands, the hands of people who practice this particular religious tradition. And therefore, it becomes a mockery of the nature of God or the person of God. And it only stands to reason that whatever advocacies are erected on such caricatures of God are bound to be anti-human, and they spew up a series of atrocities and inhumanities, which is the reason why religion is also recorded in history as one of the major promoters of violence and bloodshed, hatred, calumny, and ill will among human beings. Whereas the true purpose of religion should be exactly the opposite, namely to promote goodwill, harmony, and peace in the world. Religions organized in the manner that they are in this world have served exactly the opposite purpose, and all religions have been intolerant, whereas all religions have come up because of dissent. It is this paradox that I plead with my viewers to realize. There is obviously, you can take this thought much further afield. I'm not advocating blasphemy as an end in itself. I'm only saying that the sacred duty to think for oneself in order to be truthful, in order to be open to the higher possibilities contained in every human situation and every person, will be perceived as blasphemous by the custodians of the established religion, who can only think of it in terms of protecting the status quo. The problem in protecting and perpetuating the status quo is that in that case, religion becomes a huge hindrance to human progress. And religious establishments will come to live or exist for themselves. And they'll become a hindrance and a liability to human progress and personal welfare, and which is the case today with every religious tradition that I can think of. Individuals, well-meaning individuals, individuals who want to think for themselves, individuals who care for truth, reality, and righteousness, they live suffocated within the established within the framework of established religions. And within Christianity, within every church, I have come across individuals who live or exist in a suffocated manner. But like Marcus Aurelius, they think that there's an alternative and they have to endure. They feel that if the status quo is disturbed, anarchy will erupt and that the world will come to an end. It is utterly fallacious. Such people should realize that the world has progressed only by disturbing, in fact, subverting the status quo, which is a necessary precondition for going from the old to the new. That's why Jesus said, no one keeps new oil in old wineskins. We are, as custodians of religious orthodoxy, committed only to the wineskins. We are averse to the wine, the new wine. And spirituality is nothing but a very clear and unmistakable invitation to shift the focus from the wineskin to the wine itself, the wine of life. Think of it. The real benefactors of humanity in every field were perceived in their times in the religious context as blasphemers and in the non-religious or secular context as enemies of the people. And the Norwegian dramatist Henrik Ibsen has a play by that title. Ibsen's play, Enemy of the People. An enemy of the people, where a man who is a real philanthrope, a man who really loves the people, is persecuted by the very people he seeks to serve. And George Bernard Shaw takes up that theme or deals with that theme in Saint Joan, Joan, which is a story of Joan of Arc, how she is burned at stake simply because she fought for the cause that was dear to her and for the welfare of her people. So this is a pattern that we cannot overlook, and it's a pattern that we need to remind ourselves of more and more in our times, because I do this video particularly because I find that the spirit of intolerance is rising in our midst. It's an alarming phenomenon, and it is spreading everywhere like cancer. It threatens the health of our country, our society, and the integrity of our own personality, and no good can come out of it. It is an entirely self-destructive, self-corrupting process, and we will do well to be aware of this and to avoid its many patterns and expressions as best we can. So remember, the benefactors of humanity in the religious context were all labeled blasphemers. They were dissenters. They thought for themselves. They refused to parrot the official line. They sought to be more faithful to their own conscience, their own personal integrity, than to the dictates of orthodoxy. And they disowned, they rejected the idea of infallibility, which is a pretension of orthodoxy when it seeks to shut its eyes and the eyes of others to the call of truth and the call of human progress through history. Thank you. All the very best.